I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. Glad to be here. Glad to have you along. Today is our Friday show. We call it the Healing Circle. Usually I'm here with my co-host and partner in this work, Dr. BraVada Garrett-Akinsanya, the creator of the African American Child Wellness Institute, and also the principal at Draken's Consulting and Psychological Services. She's having some work done today and wishing her health and wellness, and we'll miss her. Let's go forward. I'm expecting that we'll be joined momentarily by Dr. Oliver Williams, who's another part of this great team. And our intent today is to discuss domestic violence. I want to shout out again, as I did yesterday, the National Newspaper Publishers Association, the Black Press of America, celebrating, I think it's 195 years of existence in this country, in this hemisphere, and the association itself, NNPA, I think a major force, a major light in bringing the Black press, bringing the story of Black people. So before we do that, I see my colleague Brenda is here. Brenda, bring Brenda on stage. Bring Brenda in. And hey, Brenda, how you doing?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, AZ.
How are you doing? You hear me okay?
Fine. I'm good.
Okay, let me change my speakers in here because I'm hearing some feedback. Hold on. Settings and audio. And how about now? I think you still hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. I'm getting my audio from somewhere different from where I usually get it. And so I don't know what I've done differently, but as long as you can hear me, that's fine. Did you have something in particular you wanted to talk about today?
Not really.
Okay. Well, let me have you react to the things that I'm reading and talking about. We're waiting on Dr. Oliver Williams to join us. I just got a book from the Minnesota Historical Society, I think yesterday or day before, and it's a book by an author, Chad Montree. The book is entitled Whiteness in Plain View. And
yeah, I wrote that down from yesterday. That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, I mentioned it talking to Yusuf. And I'll just share again. Hey, Dr. Williams, what it's about. It says, and this is about Minnesota. That's why it's so interesting. Widely seen as a progressive stronghold of the Midwest, Minnesota has also some of the greatest racial disparities in the nation. Those disparities have their roots in Minnesota's earliest days as a territory and in the decades that followed. From enslaved, I'll hold it up and keep reading from the back. From enslaved people brought to the territory by military officers to migrants traveling to the North Star State after the Civil War, African Americans have long been present in Minnesota's history. Yet, while many came here looking to establish new lives, they were often met with white resistance and attempts to exclude them. Efforts to maintain the supremacy of white interest over those of Black residents can be found in towns, cities, and suburbs throughout the state. Now, the last paragraph here on the cover notes say, Whiteness in Plain View examines the ways white residents across Minnesota acted to intimidate, control, remove, and keep out African Americans over the course of the 19th and 20th centuries. Their methods ranged from anonymous threats, vandalism, and mob violence to restrictive housing covenants, realtor deceit, and mortgage discrimination, and they were aided by local, state, and federal government agencies, as well as openly complicit public officials. What they did was not an an anomaly or aberration in some particular place or passing moment, but rather it was common and continuous. Chapter by chapter, this book shows that Minnesota's overwhelming whiteness is neither accidental nor incidental, and that racial exclusion's legacy is very much woven into the state's contemporary politics, economy, and culture. The author, Chad Montree, is a professor in the history department at the University of Massachusetts Lowell. He's the author of 4 books, including The Myth of Silent Spring, Rethinking the Origins of American Environmentalism. Interesting. And so I just jumped into it yesterday a little bit. I'm also reading, guys, I'm maybe 5 chapters into this fascinating book. I'm about to start chapter 6. The book is called The Eloquence of the Scribes. And I've become a fan of Aikwe Arma, the author of this and other books. I've got 3 of his books on my reading table right now. But the chapters in this book, which he describes as a collection of essays that sort of guide his early life, walk us through his early life and living in his family and his movement to educate themselves and to figure out how to be authentic and not be, what's the right word for it, nullified by the overwhelming presence of European ideology and European interest that existed all over Africa and certainly all over the world. So it's a good book that talks about, I think, the first chapter, myth, literature, and the African child. The proposition is that formal education in the West is education to appreciate Europeanness. It's education that poses that civilization started with the Greeks and the Romans, and that anything before that was either non-existent or irrelevant, inconsequential. Therefore, with the stroke of a decision of where history started, the entire antiquity of Africa and its role in the creation of civilization neutralized, nullified, and dismembered. So he goes into that, and he talks about in succeeding chapters the process of going into that education system and how he was able to resist it. It was his natural inclination as a child and as a growing up as a learner in both high school and in university. Great book. I'm enjoying reading it. I'm also reading this book. I just opened it this morning, but it's a book by Professor Theophole Obenga. He's an Egyptologist, a historian, a linguist, and a philosopher with doctoral and postdoctoral degrees from Bordeaux, Paris, Pittsburgh, Geneva, and Montpellier. And he's been part of the writing of the General History of Africa, a project by UNESCO. This book talks about African philosophy beginning with the Pharaonic period, 2780 to 330 BC. And I'm reading that because he is the teacher of a class that I'm taking online through Nubia. The teacher is Mario Beatty, Dr. Mario Beatty, who is an associate professor at the Howard University Africana Studies Department. Dr. Beatty is teaching an online course in hieroglyphics. I'm taking a course in hieroglyphics, and it's just absorbing me at the moment. I'm excited just to learn not only the alphabet and the reasoning, the language of hieroglyphics, but the philosophy of civilization implied and carried in that. And what's exciting to me, what I'm learning really, is that we had operational concepts about what existence is that predate what we've been taught in the academy in the Western world. That's the question. How do we escape? How do we, and Greg Carr calls it, how do we jailbreak the Western framework that assigns us to the opposite end of the spectrum of a vaulted whiteness, of um, a falsehood, essentially a falsehood called whiteness that places white people at the center of creation and then demands that every body and everything else genuflect at their notion of themselves as the divine, or sometimes they they think that God is their idea, you know. So anyway, that's what I'm reading. I'm excited about all of that, and what's cool at the moment, Dr. Oliver. It feels like the approach that I'm sort of falling into uh, is one of convergence, where I'm being able to synchronize and synthesize ideas and stories and narratives into a bigger picture that makes sense for me, for Al McFarlane right now, and my sense of who I am and my identity and what I believe is my work in the world. For that, I'm grateful. I'm thankful. So that's enough of me today, but I'll be talking about these books and what I'm learning probably from now on, and as part of all the conversations I'm having. And
So
to
I
me,
have a question now.
go ahead, Brenda.
With everything that you and Yusef especially have been introducing to listeners and viewers or whatever, and then I have been writing about the power of the teachers union and the power of the textbook union. So how do we get this into the real truth, into textbooks and into the classrooms, and especially into teacher training of cultural relevance of what's going on now? I'm sorry.
That's a great question, and I don't have the answer to it at the moment, but I think it's the right question, and maybe that's something we can discuss as we go along. Is how do we, as we acquire new information, new knowledge, connect with, join with other people who are pioneering in the excavation of information that had been either dismissed, disregarded, hidden, or by whatever means unavailable. And as that information becomes available, what is our obligation and what is our duty? And the question that Greg Carr, who is the head of the Africana Studies Department at Howard University, and who is the principal, along with Dr. Karen Hunter, in the narrative initiative called In Class with Carr every Saturday morning, 8 o'clock Central Time. The question he raises is, innovation, excavating new knowledge, but to what end? What does it do to free us? And to me, that's a critical question. Our bid remains a bid in the course of our lifetime, but understanding our particular brief lifetime as a part of a millennial experience that is real, and that we can, with intention, operate with a sense of both continuity and a sense of awareness that we're part of something, that there's legacy, that there's history, that for us, the history doesn't begin where we've been told it begins, 1619 or 1492, or even with the Arab and European invasion of continental Africa, but it predates that. And if we can put those traumas in perspective and go beyond that to the choices our people have made, and at this point, our people becomes the people, all people. And if we find a way to examine the choices that humanity uh, has humanity faced and made probably different things at different times and different elements of it, but it allows us to harmonize and to bring with confidence ideas, strategies, approaches to life and living that may be different from the hierarchical system that is characterized by the European paternalistic system that we live under today. And Dr. Williams, criticize me if I'm wrong. Jump in and give me some feedback, because I may be, out of class here, but that's what I'm feeling and what I'm seeing. And I think, Brenda, your question is a great question. It's the right question. How do we start having conversations like this in all of our classrooms? I say even more so, how do we have it at the dinner table? How do we have it between sons and parents and their children, their sons and daughters, between family members, so that, in my mind, I hear what I read some years ago, and that was a report of Herodotus, the Greek, I think a Greek explorer and philosopher, writing about the people who discovered when he went to Egypt, and he wrote with astonishment that these Black people were philosophers.
Blown away by Black people.
They presented themselves in ordinary discourse as people engaged with the philosophy of life and living. So how do we get there again and get back to that as a defining characteristic of who we are, thinking deeply and thinking in ways that show and reveal an awareness of cosmology, an awareness of science, an awareness of the environment, of the natural world, and an awareness of the world of the mind, the world of the body, the world of the spirit, and in a way that is based on some concept of sharing. I think you and Dr. My brother's name talked about Ma'at, and Ma'at, I'm reading now, is at the foundation of everything in the system of African thought, of ancient Egyptian thought, ancient African thought, and Ma'at being a set of principles about cooperation and collaboration that at its core meant that everybody is to be considered, that everybody has a right to be here, and we have an obligation and a process that allows us to engage everybody, to share knowledge with everybody, and to allow and appreciate and nurture the contribution everybody makes to the evolution of knowledge, and the reflection of that being in how we organize society, to feed society, to build habitat for humanity, and how we interact with the animal and natural world. So, Dr. Williams, I'm going to hand the talking stick to you. Jump in where you want to, and you can change this whole conversation wherever you want it to go.
Dr. Williams, my boss just gave me a headache with all of that. It was like, how do you filter through it? It's deep.
Well, I think for me, a couple things. One is it would be interesting to find someone who, and maybe the brother that's at Howard, maybe to come on the show, because if there's someone who ends up being an educator around education, I think what we know and what's in our textbook has been a political struggle over the years to try to figure out what it is that we know and what it is that we want to share with people about, our history, and what gets into the textbooks and what doesn't. And
yeah, that's my concern.
Yeah, and so
the training and the books.
Yeah, and so we talk about critical race theory. It's interesting to me that some decisions associated with that recently has been, well, we don't want to share certain information because we don't want people to feel shame or guilt about the history of their participation in that. Therefore, we won't teach it. Mm-hmm. So if what we want to do is to sort of go back and to look at that. That's an interesting question, but one that sort of goes back to us understanding and knowing ourselves, and to the extent that we have been excluded from some of that history, that's really where the political fight has been. And what we see is relevant, and also historically, as African people, knowing ourselves and our history. And on the one hand, I think it's really important for us to be able to know our history, both the things that we can esteem and value, but also, some of the warts and scars that we have in terms of how we behave too. But sort of understanding ourselves and our history and our strengths is something that I think is really important. But one of the things that I wanted us to have a conversation about and talk to Dr. B about was the fact that I wanted us to kind of go in a direction where we talk about community health and we talk about wellness, you know, in our community and of ourselves. And I wanted us to have a conversation around what I told Dr. B yesterday about the issue of domestic violence, and the conversation that we left off. I think we had a conversation a couple of weeks ago, and there was a comment towards the end about men being people being violent towards one another. And the comment that I wanted to make, but it wasn't the time to make the comment then, was, I believe that people can change. And I believe that men who batter can change. I'm not necessarily sure that men who batter can change in the time when they're actively being abusive to their partner, because, and this is the key point, I don't think they know how to change. And I think that they have to learn how to be different and how to change. And when women leave relationships with men who batter, it's one of the most dangerous times for them is when they leave. And they need, in most cases, and so there's a range of ways that people are affected by it. But that's one of the most dangerous times, when people get into an argument. Oftentimes, the woman may want to leave and then take the children, and as a consequence, when he gets wind of it, then what happens is that he can try to figure out how to get her to stay. And I'm not saying that happens in all cases, and I'm not saying that men are the only ones that are always the ones that are violent. But I am saying that, in generally speaking, it is a dangerous time for women when they choose to leave relationships. And we have to find ways to have support within our community to be able to address that. And I'm not sure that we have.
Can I ask a question, Dr. Williams?
Uh-huh.
Is there any movement toward training more mental health clinicians, of steering maybe graduates into this field? Because we need more people out. We need, I'm trying to think of what Mother Atun called it, ground warriors or ground navigators.
Yeah.
But they have to be trained.
Right.
They have to know. I listened to something this morning about mental health and the money that's going into mental health. But the one thing that came up was the fact that they don't have enough clinicians to do the work.
Yeah.
They're talking about police not doing mental health calls, that they needed a social worker or a mental health, someone who was versed in the field.
Right.
But if you don't have anyone to do that, or if you're not emphasizing that we need more psychologists and we need people who can, because this is a tough time. and it's getting worse with the war.
Well,
Because we're going to hit it within the next 2 or 3 weeks when it comes to gas, when it comes to food scarcity, all of that, because this isn't going to stop. He's
and I don't
on
think,
a roll.
yeah, Brendan, I don't think it's just social workers or just psychologists. It's social workers and psychologists and community people who are trained to know something.
Community who are trained. Yeah,
Right.
that's it.
And
Can we put
professional.
training into the centers, the community centers?
Well, I think that's important, and I think for us to develop relationships with programs that do that work is important too. But let me take it one step further. I think we need to do it in faith houses as well. You know, I've been working with some people across the country who do domestic violence work in their churches
And should.
and in their mosques and in some places in their synagogues. And so, you know, we there's a woman that writes about faith and domestic violence who says that that faith houses are the uh, uh, what she calls it, the spiritual trauma centers for people. And what's been interesting is that people have encouraged, or so the usually the first place that people go when they have challenges, many people go when they have challenges, is they go to the faith leaders to try to get some support to understand the issue and try to resolve it. But for years, one of the things that's happened is that um, people have discouraged uh, victims to going to those faith leaders because they get bad information
It
and
is true.
or they can't hear what the person is talking about. So there's a program that I engage with in Mississippi where the pastor grew up in a household, and actually he's a bishop because he has 34 churches that he has responsibility for, and he grew up in a household where his father was abusive to his mother. And he said that when he made the decision to be to go into faith as a career, he said that that was one issue that he was going to address. So he has training, and part of his ministry is to teach people within the church to be able to listen to somebody talking about the issue of domestic violence and then get them directed to an appropriate space for support. But he not only works with victims of abuse, so women and children, he also works with men that batter. And and actually, if you go to will2change.org, and it's WILL, the digit or the number two, not TWO, the digit two, change.org, and go to Speaking of Faith, you'll see different, probably about 4 different cities that are doing things in their faith houses to address the issue of domestic violence, including Bishop Ellis, that's in Detroit, where they had Aretha Franklin's funeral. We went to his church and videotaped the work that he's doing with Minister LaDonna Combs, where they educate people within the church in Sunday school, but they have an effort to be able to reach out to people. And one of the um, uh, members of the church donated a house that they turned into a battered women's shelter.
Oh, that's cool.
And and Bishop Ellis tells an interesting story about why he did the work. But Bishop Roderick Mitchell also tells a story about why and how he got into it. And if you're going to be a part of the churches that he's engaged with, the reason why he's the thing that he said he had to do was he had to learn how to deal with his own reactions to having been exposed to it, and then to change it. And he had to find ways to be able to deal with his own emotions associated with domestic violence for him to be a leader and to be at peace with it himself before he moved forward with it. So it's got to be.
Dr. Williams, can we admit, though, that the faith houses are not like it was when, Al and I were growing up? We had Sunday school, and we had my Catholic friends had CYO parties and CYO workshops and tutoring and breakfasts. I mean, we had the whole gamut, and we weren't afraid of or the fear of the faith house. They were supporting us,
Right.
and they were teaching us. Um, my children left it because of certain things that were not there. Not that they left God, it was the organization
Right.
that has changed so.
Yeah.
So I just think we have to, there's so many things to figure out. And I learned so much from all of you, but I'm very concerned that we need to do things different.
Yeah. And I think there are some places that are actually doing those things that are different, but there are some places that are not. And there's some places that are including it and creating a ministry around it. And there's some places that are not. And so, for example,
Oh, yay.
that people oftentimes quote Ephesians 5:22, where it says, "Women, submit yourselves to your husband as you would to the Lord." And then, but they don't read the whole chapter. And the whole chapter it says, "Submit yourselves to one another as you would unto the Lord." And it also talks to men about how they should treat their partners, and they should treat her with love and respect. And I'm paraphrasing, but it says, basically a man shouldn't hurt his partner. Basically, only a fool would hurt himself. Should treat his partner as he treats himself, and only a fool would hurt himself. And it talks about how you're supposed to relate to and behave towards your partner. In Islam, they have. It's interesting to me that some people think that Islam gives men the right to be abusive to their partners. It's not true. As a matter of fact, Muhammad said, don't be abusive to your partner. And he also talks about the fact that, that there are 5 different ways that a man can deal with conflict without abuse, and makes those statements associated with that, and also gives guidance about, some people think that men can have multiple partners. Men do have multiple partners. It's not and that they draw from the text, but the text and the context of understanding it is very, very different, because Muhammad was talking about taking in women who were whose husbands were killed in war, and he wasn't suggesting that men just marry multiple women. There was a context to be able to understand it, and so there's something about being able to reflect on text and tradition and culture that will challenge how people think about things, how they behave towards things. I've been most impressed with faith houses that really make the effort to understand the words of their faith text, but also to be able to interpret what the faith text has to say, and then prepare people within the faith houses to be able to respond to people to deal with challenges. Ministers may say, or, you should stay with your husband because God hates divorce, and not give consideration towards the lethality of somebody's behavior. Because I don't think God wants us to harm people either, or to kill people. But yet, sometimes that's the strategy that people use to justify the behavior towards, their partner. And we have to reframe that and give people places to go. And places I've seen that have been really strong with it is that churches will will still have people be a part of the church, but if their violence is but they see violence as a crime, and if somebody is being actively abusive, they'll send that person to another church, and then work with that person to get healthy, but provide support and protection for the victim of abuse. And the thing is that I'm not so sure that we're as broad as we need to be about that issue. We need to have ministries within several of our churches. Not Reverend Diane Thibodeau. She, in our community in the Twin Cities, she's a person that does a lot of good work associated with that too. And she and her she's remarried, but her and her deceased husband, Rufus Thibodeau, they worked on that collectively, to address the issue.
Dr. Williams, Al did a wonderful interview with a young lady from Sri Lanka, and the article comes out on Monday, but it was called the Jeremiah Program.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was writing the article, and I just said to myself, oh my God, we need so many more, programs like this. And the basis of that program was empowerment of single women with children. And the Jeremiah program is in 9 cities right now. And I'm getting ready to introduce it to Albuquerque, because I think I live in Santa Fe, but Albuquerque has more BIPOC single mothers. And it's the type of program, they have donors, and these women are able to stay on campus. They have high quality early childhood programs. They go to college. They earn a 2-year associate's degree, and then can be transferred to a 4-year college. And I just saw so much hope in this type of program. We sort of like, we've got to embrace our children. And in order to embrace our children, we've got to take care and teach our parents, no matter whether it's COVID or war, racial conflict, or whatever. I saw Diane. I love Diana Hawkins. I just love her spirit and her passion. And about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I just saw this pain in this woman, this mother and grandmother. And she said, our kids are traumatized.
Mm-hmm.
And we just need our parents to have this empowerment of saying, we're going to do this and our kids are going to be saved. Because see, I see us having all of this. And I keep saying we need to clone a Dr. B. But they're not able to talk about it. Last comment for me, I saw one thing that was so great, and I was going to email Dr. B. There's a teacher in Wisconsin, and she's an elementary teacher, and she makes it a point every 3 or 4 days to take one student and walk them around the building during recess and let them talk to her.
Mm-hmm.
No embarrassment, no nothing. Do you feel like talking? Is there something you want to do you need help? Is there just something that you want to say that you can't say to your peers or in front of your peers? They need to be able to escape all of this somehow. And that's the reason when I saw, well, Al had another good one with Tyrone Terrell, our Kansas City native. And it was like, this isn't the time for strike. The time is to heal these babies. And that's what Dr. B just pleads all the time. We've got, and if you're in trouble, here's my number. We've got to, I don't know. I'm going back to training different, training parents. I don't know. I get frustrated. I have to write about it. I don't get a chance to read as much as I'd love to do, but having spent almost 4 decades in a classroom and seeing the success that we had, and it wasn't them throwing money into magnet schools or whatever, it was the training that we got. I trained under a guy by the name of Dr. Ed Beasley, and I know that Al remembers Jeremiah Cameron. These two guys were just unbelievable when it came to empowering Black students. And I was in graduate school, and I felt like I had gone back to grade school by the time he started going. But it stayed with me all that time. And
Well,
I just think we need to start thinking differently and doing things differently.
well, I think having people have the skill sets to focus on particular sets of issues is important around the
Yep.
faith issue. I think that's among the things that some of the ministers and bishops and imams have been saying is that, for example, they say don't just go to the minister, go to the mosque board, because they're the ones that help shape decisions. Not only do you go to the pastor, but you go to the people that are part of the ministry, the part of the deacons board and deaconesses board, to try to educate them associated with it, and then finally bring that information in. But what the pastors have done that I've seen, pastors and imams done that I've seen, is that they brought it in and developed programming around it, and then strategies to be responsive. But among the other things that they did is that they were very clear with what the faith text suggested and gave people direction on how to approach things. And I think with anything, and as you're talking about things changing, there's a bishop that I'm connected with in Tennessee, and they've changed their programming associated with how people deal with a range of issues, including health and wellness, and defining what health and wellness is. They have a exercise and program and things associated with meals and such. And that's the thing that I've been sort of impressed with about how some of those faith communities have done the work to address domestic violence, to make sure that when people, first of all, that people can hear it. A lot of women talk about the fact that they were turned off about going to faith houses, because when they tried to tell the stories, they said that there was a holy hush because ministers couldn't hear what they were saying.
Yeah, that's what my daughters feel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The wrong direction. So what they want to do is they want to, and that's the big thing, they've been trained to look at the issue and not just let it be organic, that they wanted to know something about it. So they trained, the ministers were trained, and they trained people within their church or faith house to be able to understand the work and then do the work. And so, but I think that's the thing, is how do we get people committed to um, be involved in looking at that and responding.
And not have personal agendas.
Yeah, and then working through those things, because some places had men's groups, so they have men's groups and women's groups, and I have gone to churches and done presentations, so they would have something on family, and when they would do something on family, you get everybody wanting to run into the church to be a part of the education associated. When you did things around domestic violence, you had people that didn't want to show up, and they didn't want to show up, I think a lot, partially because they didn't want to be identified with the problem. They didn't want to be embarrassed by saying, well, this is going on in my household. In some faith houses, saying that they didn't want that to be associated with their church. But, we're talking about healing and restoration. And so, and part of it is really being educated and knowing what to do when there is an issue. And
It would be nice to have more women on the pulpit.
Yeah, that can help. But, just because there's a woman in the pulpit doesn't necessarily mean that she's got the right answer.
That might be true, but it would be a good start.
That's a whole nother issue.
I know. I'm sorry. Feminists.
Can y'all hear me?
Dr. Irma, feminists.
Can you hear me at all?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, I was just wondering if my mic was turned off or not. So let me take this up another level. I mean, this is a great conversation. Thank you, Brenda. And thank you, Dr. Williams. I want to note that Dr. B is monitoring the program. She's coming out of recovery, and she's sending notes. She said to remind people that we do need more providers of African descent, and that the African American Child Wellness Institute has a bill in the House that will provide funding to train more African American licensed mental health providers and peer counselors to deliver mental health services right in the community. The bill is House File 3372, and we are inviting listeners, viewers, supporters to write and or call representatives, encouraging them to vote to support that bill. We've got that on the screen there, the House File 3372. So that's an important thing. And Joanne Clark is listening. She said, powerful conversation. Our babies need our help. Joanne, thank you for listening. And thank you for the comment. For others, we want to make sure that conversations like this are conversations that bring value to you, your life, your experience, your worldview, and your sense of empowerment. That's why we're here, is to create a place for you to tell your truth and to act on your indwelling in intelligence, your insight, and your desire for creating a community where the best of humanity can flourish and reveal the potential that all of us have. So I'm saying this, Doctor, to go back to the comments I made at the front, trying to tie it together, because the domestic violence issues we're talking about are very specific and very present in our families and communities today. But I don't doubt these issues have not been around since the dawn of humanity, right? And so the question is there a process, a system, a way of knowing, a way of learning how to know that teaches us or instructs us away from self-destruction? You described the literature, the scripture, saying, a person doesn't want to hurt himself. If you don't want to hurt yourself, why would you hurt your partner? Because the nature of partnership is oneness, of the two becoming one. And so to hurt your partner is therefore to hurt yourself. And it's not normal for a person to want to help hurt himself unless he's got bad information or a bad practice developed. Going back to my book with Dr. Aikwe Arma, and just pull up this one piece. He says, it's a paragraph, two of the major institutions for the development of European culture, the church in medieval times, followed by the academy since then, the academy education, right, have kept recycling this worship of violence, finessing it into justifications of European acts of aggression against the world's peoples, followed by the theft of their resources. Papal bulls in the 15th century encouraged encouraged European gangsters to roam the world, seizing heathen lands and enslaving their owners for the greater glory of the Christian God. By the end of the 19th century, the theory had acquired numerous kinks. According to one of the most influential modifications, Europeans were entitled to dominate all nature because they were superior to nature by virtue of their character and civilization. Other people, by contrast, were part of nature, and as such, they were fated to submit to European rule. So the question is, we have to look at and understand the culture, the social structure, right? And the social structure of the West is one that emanates from and builds and seeks to maintain this falsehood of supremacy and of being above or outside of the natural world, and therefore seeing itself as responsible for the natural world, and seeing us then, our people who are not European, as part of the world that must be brought into submission to the will and the destiny of the Europeans. And the reason I bring it up is that we experience each other in an environment that destroys our capacity to see ourselves differently, that rewards the dysfunction, even the domestic violence we're talking about in so many ways is both nurtured and rewarded by elements of the culture, while at the same time, certain elements of it say, oh, that's not good behavior. But there's a double standard and a duplicity in the messaging. There's an acceptance of our inability to live without domestic violence and an expectation that we experience or through deed, if not through word, reveal domestic violence as a character trait. I say that it's not so. How do we talk about this in a way that continues to educate ourselves to the the prescriptions of our inadequacy that we are expected to fulfill? What do you think?
Well, one of the things that I've noticed is the places that I've seen it done the best is that they challenge and confront the misinterpretations of faith text. And my friend in South Africa, who works with 9 different faiths, has the people who are faith leaders in those 9 different faiths confront the text, but reinterpret or confront the misinterpretations of the text.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that's important. But it also talks about equity. And what's interesting to me is that I remember as a little boy, I felt as though men were empowered to be dominant, and that their responsibility in terms of leadership was to be able to take charge and to be a leader within their family. But leadership took on different definitions through what my mom said and my dad's example. and so when I've traveled internationally, what's been interesting to me is that people from different countries define it differently, and then suggest talk about how culture and sexism has an influence to get men to behave in particular ways so they can take charge. And so, but that may not be the way that it was intended. So we need to sort of reflect on how we interpret, but also how we behave towards one another. And then how do we define it with regard to, our children and how they see themselves interacting in the world and behaving towards one another. How do men behave towards women? How do women behave towards men? And how do you do it so it's not, I used to get the sense that, it was a thing about the fact that men were supposed to be dominant, and the way that sometimes it gets interpreted that women are supposed to be submissive. And to me, but that doesn't necessarily say that's where the skill sets are. So Sonia, my wife, might be better at certain things than I am.
Mm-hmm.
And how do I value what she brings that I don't have, and vice versa? And I think those are the things that we've got to negotiate is and talk about, educate one another about in terms of how we relate to one another. And those are skill sets. I mean, those are, when men who batter get that feeling, and that feeling is when they feel like they've gone as far as they can go without using abuse.
Mm-hmm.
But be foolish to think that abuse is going to solve the problem. And the way that I feel about it's kind of like saying that you can grab hold of water. So if you put your hand in a bathtub and you try to grab the water, you don't have the water in your hand.
Mm-hmm.
It's and you can't grab it like that. And so, but sometimes men who batter believe if they grab it to hold on to it, they've got access to it. That's not the case. They've got to learn how to rethink it. And if and I think the thing that's interesting in terms of what motivates men to be different is that they realize that control is not helping them, and that they can't control the thing that they're the target that they are trying to control.
Mm-hmm.
That they have to learn different ways of behaving, particularly if they don't want somebody to leave them the next time. So sometimes pain is the thing that motivates people to change and learn different skill sets.
We're out of time. What a great conversation. Let's continue it next week. You can bet that I'll be trying to bring an Afrocentric and antiquity analysis. I'm having so much fun reading and discussing what I'm reading in every context, every situation, and hopefully challenging and stimulating us to be expansive in how we analyze where we are. And to what end? It's because, Doctor, I do believe that we have both the right and the responsibility to shoulder the task of writing a future. We must see ourselves as the authors of a future, and the outcome of that authorship is a story in which we win. We can win. That's what I think. Listen, we'll see you next week. Take care. Thanks, Brenda. Thanks, Doc.